we are back with another In the Sheds, boys. I'm very excited for this one, as per usual. I just love In the Sheds, you know. We learn so much. It's not even just about, you know, sitting down and having a bit of banter. We actually do learn an incredible amount. You know, we've had Jesse Parahi on the show. We've had, you know, Chasing Kangaroos, Charlie Dixon and Jamie Soward. It's honestly been fantastic to be a part of In the Sheds, and I continuously look forward every week for a new episode. First off, before we get into our guest show, which I'm really excited for because we actually haven't spoken about cricket before. We haven't spoken about the international game, and this guest tonight is actually a major contributor to the exposure of international game in regards to, you know, minnow nations and places that you wouldn't really have heard before. And it's just a really interesting project that he currently has going on. So I'm definitely looking forward to talking a little bit more about that. But first off, let's obviously welcome the boys, Mr. Shirls and Mr. Hayden, Entertain House. How we going, boys?
Another day, another podcast.
Oh,
Blaze,
I hate you. I can't believe you say this every single time. You say this every single time, mate.
Yeah, we're getting right into it now. I've had some fantastic guests. I think this one's going to grind all our gears, and I think we're going to learn a lot tonight, boys.
Yeah, I think this is going to be very similar in regards to when we spoke to, obviously, Michael from Chasing Kangaroos. You know, that was obviously all about the international rugby league game and the growth and the exposure that is really necessary for these kind of sports to get the limelight in these places that, you know, deserve limelight, but because they're a lot, obviously, smaller nations and smaller places, they don't get the limelight they deserve. So let's welcome in our guests. Let's stop talking us three, because people didn't come here to see us three, you know. People came here to see our bloody guests, as per usual. But today, guys, in the Sheds, we're going to be welcoming another podcaster who delves into the world of all things cricket. Similar to when we had Chasing Kangaroos, as I said, our guest today specifies in the lesser known teams of the international game. These including places like Nepal, Thailand, Ireland, Namibia, you name it, and I damn well tell you, he covers it. Over 80 episodes and counting, boasting well over 60 hours of consumable content, and so much knowledge to his name that he actually conquered the TV show Pointless. Yeah, I'm telling you, he conquered the TV show Pointless. I remember it, and he won the jackpot too, I believe. I believe he actually won the jackpot as well, which is just, you know, it's surreal. If you know that show, trust me, it's not easy. Our guest believes he is possibly the only man to commentate 2 ODIs in a single day. It is none other than the emerging cricket podcast, Daniel Beswick. Let's welcome him, boys.
Yeah. G'day, boys. Great to be in the Sheds, and Blaze. Just on a personal front, it's good to catch up on a Skype call for the first time in about 4 or 5 years. Yeah, you haven't changed much, I got to say.
Yeah, well, look, you know, I hope I look a little bit better than I did 5-6 years ago. But a little bit of background knowledge. Wow. Okay. You know what? I'm going to hang up. Sorry. If I hear one more.
In early. Come on, got to get it in early, please.
I tell you what, you see this? There's a red button here. I think it's a red button. It's got like a phone on it. I'm going to click that one. Yeah, hold on. Yeah. No, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background knowledge. I actually know Bez from well before I even started YouTube. I was doing stuff with a thing called OTLF. By the way, Bez, is OTLF still a thing?
Over the Line Sports is still a thing. Specialising in AFL and NRL Supercoach, I believe, as well as NBA Fantasy. A couple of guys are still running that.
Still kicking on.
Technically still own it, I think. So if it ever kicks off, there might be an awkward conversation there. But no, it looks, to my knowledge, yeah, it's still running, and yeah, still keeping in contact with a few of the guys running that, which is good.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, that was always good fun. That was actually something that really got made me keen about getting into the online world of sports, and it gave me the kind of the building blocks to create YouTube, because I originally, in a Skype call with this man, with Bez, we were actually, you know, going to create YouTube ourselves, and we were going to get into the YouTube game and do what our passions are, and look where we are 5-6 years later. We're on a podcast, BK Sport and Emerging Cricket, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, so I just need to get Michael Candeloro on here. I'm not sure what he's doing at the moment in lockdown, but I think he's working for the Rabbitohs, so he's fulfilling a dream there, albeit for a different footy team to the one he supported as a kid. But yeah, everyone's gone on to do different things, and it's, yeah, again, pretty good to see.
Living our passions, mate. That's the main thing.
Work for the Rabbitohs, but we do have someone who's worked for the Tigers with us tonight.
Oh, here we go. Oh, if I have to hear this one more time.
Last week show.
Shameless plug and the NRL.
Oh, okay. All right, boys. Let's look, boys. It's time we talk some cricket. You know, we've had the banter, we've had a little bit of background knowledge, but I'm really interested in talking today about what Bez does, because it's not something that I guess most people would be obsessed with, like Bez is, and it's really, you know, it's really good to see someone putting in the effort in regards to these lower minnow nations, and giving them the recognition that they deserve, because, you know, otherwise they kind of wouldn't get anything shown whatsoever, and especially with some of these teams like that Bez is about to mention. Like there are teams out there that I guess would never ever be heard of if it wasn't for places like emerging cricket.
Yeah, well, I think we do a pretty good job in uncovering a lot of stories from the emerging game, and I think one thing that cricket lags behind in is that its exposure and its social media presence and a lot of its marketing is actually quite poor in conjunction or in comparison to a lot of other sports around. So it shoots itself in the leg a little bit, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of this later through other questions. But at times, I think that things like the International Cricket Council and a lot of the cricketing bodies who are big players in the game are actually not doing a good enough job in exposing a lot of these stories for Australia. From Australia's point of view, you know, October, assuming everything goes okay and we can have international sport on again, we're hosting a men's T20 World Cup at the end of the year. We just hosted a women's T20 World Cup as well. And not many people knew the story of Thailand qualifying for the women's T20 World Cup, which I think is a bit of a tragedy, because the story there was incredible. Some of the stories we heard from them. But if you look forward to the men's T20 World Cup, which is coming up in October, we have the likes of Oman, Namibia, PNG, the Netherlands, Scotland, Ireland, all competing in the first round, along with Bangladesh and Sri Lanka in that first round of the T20 World Cup. And there's some magnificent stories about how they, first of all, how they qualify, but now, given the situation in the situation that we're in at the moment, you know, what they're doing to train, given that everyone's in lockdown. You know, I'm hearing from guys in Namibia who are doing circuit training on WhatsApp calls, and guys in PNG who are doing laps on dilapidated basketball courts. Like there's just so many stories that don't get looked at, because, you know, a lot of the international cricket focus is focused on the big markets, and we talk a lot about the big three in international cricket, and that is India, England, and Australia. Yeah. We're one of the biggest culprits in all of this. And yeah, from their point of view, you know, there's been test series in the last 2 years between, say, Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka, which also didn't really get a lot of exposure, which is crazy, because, you know, they're two full member nations. They're two nations that play test cricket. And
I was at that Sri Lanka game too. I was at the Sri Lanka test up in at Brisbane. Sorry, in Brisbane, the Gabba. I went to that, and there was literally no coverage. Like there was no coverage at all. I guess that we were playing Sri Lanka, and I guess they've kind of gone backwards, I would say, compared to what they would usually be known as. But in the same sense, it's still Sri Lanka. It's still a massive cricketing nation, and for them to get absolutely no coverage of really advertising that game, when it still is Australia, it still is a big nation like Australia, there was no real coverage of that, and it was, you know, there was no real crowds, and it was just it was quite disappointing, to be honest.
Yeah, it was a little bit disappointing, and I think a lot of it was to do with the hangover post the India home series. I think we had 6 test matches that summer. We had 4 against India and then 2 against Sri Lanka, as you rightly point out. And I think, you know, we lost that series at home to India, and Smith and Warner were still out. And I think a lot of people kind of looked at that series and went, oh, yeah, no, the summer's still going. And I think this summer just gone as well was also the same. You know, we were about to have Australia-New Zealand one-day internationals in March when, you know, the footy seasons have already started. And everyone was questioning, you know, why is there so much cricket being played? And the problem then becomes a case of, well, if you have so many games during a summer, it dilutes the quality, and it dilutes, you know, the interest in the game. You know, we've looked at the way that the Big Bash, the BBL, has expanded in the last 2 seasons in terms of everyone playing everyone, and the amount of and the number of games that are being played every summer now. You know, there's only so much cricket that even a cricket-mad country like Australia can take. You know, there's almost too much cricket. You know, I get to the end of the Big Bash in particular through my day job, where I'm working at Big Bash games. And, you know, by the end of the tournament, you're there, and you're almost relieved that there's no cricket. You know, I'd happily take a week or 2 weeks off to go and watch footy or something like that, because it just becomes too much. And yeah, you were right, in that series, you know, there was very little coverage, and you're right again, you know, Sri Lanka have probably stagnated in the international game. But I think a lot of that was also down to the fact that, we just come off a series against India, and we were well beaten by a much better side.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
At that point, in February and March, people are a little bit sick of international cricket on our shores, at least.
Well, 100% in regards to Australia, I feel like Australia, cricket has regressed. It ultimately has, and whether you regard that as what happened with the Sandpaper Gate scandal or something that really goes further back, I believe. I don't know where. Maybe it's because people have lost their attention spans in comparison to what it was before the absolute influx of social media, influx of the internet, where it's all about short and concise and get the point across. And I feel like with rugby league and with other sports, it's a lot shorter. It's 80 minutes or whatnot, and it's done real quick. But with cricket, it's a 5-day event or a whole day event, and I don't know if that attention span is there compared to what it was before. So I agree with what you're saying, like especially with Australia, like people, especially at the end of the cricketing season as well, though, I feel, especially at the end of the cricketing season, it's been a long period. So if people are able to sit down for their 5-day matches, they'll do a couple, but especially when it gets to that end, it gets really difficult.
Yeah, and the other thing too that's happened is that we've had to have international cricket work in conjunction with the BBL over the last few summers. Before then we had little windows where the test match was being played, and then we had the big bash matches work around that. Now we've got, because we're working with different broadcasters and different rights and different competitions, it's meant that people have, you could have endless cricket from, say, 10 o'clock in the morning to almost 10 at night, and watching two different games happening as they play out. And it's interesting you bring up the point of social media, and I think still, even in 2020, social media has probably been around for, in some cases maybe 15 years, for stuff like Facebook maybe sort of 10 to 12 years, and I still don't think we know the effects of all of that.
The full capacity of it, yeah.
People's development, yeah, especially for teenagers and people in their adolescence when they're developing and being exposed to social media. I think we were a little bit lucky in that, the end of our school days, Blaze, like between you and me, I think that we were kind of on the back end of school when social media hit,
Instagram
now.
wave. I think
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Instagram came out pretty much as I was finishing school. No one had an Instagram in high school that I knew of, really. It was when we were going to schoolies, I think people had an Instagram. But just going on that, firstly, I have a couple of things. With the international cricket and stuff like that, their YouTube views are pretty damn good, to be honest.
That's because of the India and the Asia region. That's because of the India and Asia region.
Yeah, but at the same... Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
go,
do you think outside the big three, you got your Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, West Indies, like they've all been, New Zealand, they've all been super competitive over like the last, you'd have to go back a bit, but like when Shoaib Akhtar was with Pakistan, and then back in the day with the West Indies and their super 80s team, they'll be competitive to a really good extent. But now it seems like that big three, they really dominate. Oh, you got South Africa too, but it seems to be that 3 or 4 really they dominate everyone, and there's no real cricket, it seems like, and the BBL is kind of, I don't know, in a weird way, supplementing what we could have got on an international level, more competitive.
Yeah, perhaps. To go back to the views, and Blaze, you make a good point. A lot of the views on a lot of the social media in terms of cricket is probably from the subcontinent, but the way that the International Cricket Council, doesn't harness that people power is a little bit disappointing. I think from a marketing front, cricket could do a lot better job, harnessing all those views and eyeballs on screens to develop the game. And yeah, Shells, you make a good point. I mean, when it all comes down to it, the big three, one, they're getting the biggest cut of funding from the ICC, but they've managed to keep that performance up on the field as well. And it's a good point that you bring up, because it was actually something that I sort of wrote down in my notes before we jumped on tonight. Tim Cutler on Emerging Cricket actually writes a good piece about this on our website, so make sure you check it out. There's a plug for Emerging Cricket right there. Sorry, please. But
go for
talking about
Shame.
Talking about talking about the funding model for international cricket, and FIFA gets a lot of flack for its corruption, and there's no doubt that FIFA is corrupt in so many ways. But
So
in FIFA meetings, every FIFA member gets one vote. It doesn't matter if you're Brazil or if you're Vanuatu, you get one vote.
yeah.
And every country gets I think it's $1.5 million US funding per annum. So yeah, again, it doesn't matter if you're Brazil, it doesn't matter if you're American Samoa, you get the same cut of funding and you can use that money however you want to.
31-0.
Yeah, exactly. It came up the other day. The
Archie
anniversary of it
Thompson,
came up the
13
other day. I
goals,
watched
mate.
Archie Thompson score 13 goals again, and looking at it, I reckon I could have bagged a hat trick in that particular game as well. But that's for another podcast. But yeah, you look at the ICC funding model, and it does kind of prove that a lot of these countries are actually playing with one hand tied behind their back even before they get onto the field and play the likes of India and Australia and England. So the way that the money works, it's tiered from India, who I think get $50 million US per annum from the ICC, and it's staggered. So I think Afghanistan and Ireland, who are 11th and 12th Test nations, they get about $5 million per annum each. So already that's a huge cut. That's already a tenth of what India get.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the other, there's over 90 members of the ICC who aren't playing Test match cricket, and between the over 90 countries, they have to split $20 million between them. So I'm not a mathematician, but that works out to being about maybe 200 grand per country.
Yeah.
But then what happens after that is that the way that these countries actually get their grants from the ICC is one from tournament prize money in the lower divisions of international cricket. They've recently been sort of reshaped, and we might get onto that a little bit later. But the other way that they do get their funding is it's what's sort of colloquially called a scorecard scheme. So basically, it's a tricky one to explain, but basically every member of the ICC has to declare how many clubs they have in the country, how many registered players they have in that country, and I think they've got to declare how many artificial and turf wickets they have in the country as well, maybe officials, volunteers, and other things too. And the bigger those numbers, the bigger the funding they get. So, you could have a club that only has, say, one turf facility and they get less of a cut of money than, say, Namibia, who has, I don't know, say 20 turf wickets around the country. So it's a very tricky one, and the teams at the very lower end of the ICC membership perpetually in this cycle where they probably will most of the time be at that level. It's a case of, surprising people whenever they get the chance through World Cup qualification, if they can qualify for a world tournament in a David versus Goliath kind of way, get into a World Cup, get a huge cut of funding. A few countries, for example, last year were in World Cricket League 2, which I was lucky enough to go along and watch in Namibia, and 4 countries were granted one-day international status. So it was the USA, Oman, Namibia, and Papua New Guinea. And what that meant was essentially $1.5 million of funding. And it basically meant that all those players were essentially contracted for the next 3 years. And they had 36 one-day internationals over the next 3 years. So if you were to lose that, like, say, Canada did, who was the other country? Hong Kong. Canada and Hong Kong came 5th and 6th in that tournament. It basically meant that a lot of those guys actually lost a job. They had to go back to a day job. And these are elite athletes in their chosen sport, and they're only, on the precipice of being, say, the 19th and 20th best countries in the world. And you're basically telling them, look, if you lose this game, you lose a job, you lose your money, you're going to have to go back and fulfill other passions you have. I was talking to a couple of guys who have been running pest control businesses and cabinet making businesses. I know Ramesh Aranga from Canada was a physio, and he had to go back and practice again because he basically lost his job as a cricketer because his team lost a particular game.
I want to ask you a question just quickly, Bez. Sorry to cut you off. I want to ask you a question just quickly about the financial aspect of the game, because that's a heavy part of what you're referring to. I want to, in regards to the lockdown situation and what we're all currently going through, the financial aspects of the game have been really well documented across, say, rugby league, for example. How is the financial aspect of the game going to be affecting these minnow nations and their progress to, for example, this T20 World Cup coming up, or just in general?
Yeah, it's a good question. And basically the conclusion that we've come to when talking about it, me and the other guys, on our podcast, is that, if you didn't have any money to begin with, then you're not going to have any money after it anyway. So a lot of these countries worked on shoestring budgets, and they're basically actually quite well prepared for stuff like this. Teams like Namibia getting, say, $1 million in funding from the ICC and then not really doing any work per se, but they haven't got too many running costs going on in the year when they're not playing cricket at all. A lot of it tends to be, well, we've got to spend money to play a game of cricket and we can win money playing games of cricket. So if there's actually no cricket on, there isn't really a loss to be had. It's just a case of a lot of these countries actually being prepared, and for a lot of team players in emerging countries like Namibia and Scotland, they have day jobs outside of cricket. So, from a personal standpoint, for a lot of these players, they're actually quite okay. I put together a piece on the website about how, emerging cricketers are actually perfect in this situation because a lot of the time they're in hotels, they can't go out, they're on tour a lot. They're not earning a lot of money in cricket, but they also, have to train at home. They have to work on their own bodies and do that sort of stuff as well. So I think cricket actually will probably come out of this relatively okay in regards to, as you said, the footy codes, which has been a big part of the Australian media over the last, say, month or two.
Thing is as well,
and
mate.
I think also too.
Thing is as well is that this is obviously not in cricket season as well. That's the thing as
100%.
well. So.
That's just, that's exactly the point I was about to make, Blaze. For the Southern Hemisphere's point of view, this crisis actually hasn't come at too bad a time. If you do look to the Northern Hemisphere and you see that the English county season is off for the foreseeable future, they'll probably stand to lose quite a bit of money there. India can basically play cricket all year round in their climate, so they're not too worried either. But from a Southern Hemisphere standpoint and from an Australian point of view, it hasn't been a big deal yet, and I don't think there'll be too much of a backlash by the time we get to the end of this.
What you're saying about the financial stuff is very similar to UEFA Champions League in that the ranking system is, if you're big and you win,
it heavily favours the better teams already.
So if you're like a smaller team
society
that comes in, you're not going to win as much. Everyone thinks, but that team got to the semi-finals, but it doesn't matter. Their ranking standpoint in the club system, how it's ranked in UEFA, isn't high enough, so they don't actually earn as much as what someone like a Manchester United or a Man City or a Barcelona would earn. So it's very interesting that
United actually have to make the Champions League for that to happen, mate.
Yeah, whatever.
But it is true, though. It's 100% true. It's a case of, once you are financially stable or rich, you have all the aces in your hand, really. It takes something remarkable for teams from, parts of Eastern Europe who are competing on one spot in their domestic leagues playing a Champions League. It takes something special. And, for someone, the example that I would probably use is something like a Shakhtar Donetsk in Ukraine, where they're probably the best team in Ukraine and have been for the last 10 years. And they've been able to attract players because they play in the Champions League every year. But, they have one bad year, they finish second. Those players leave in a mass exodus, and the clubs know where again. And Leeds, as soon as the team gets relegated to the Championship, and we saw Sunderland, basically do a double drop in the last, 2 to 3 years. It's going to take a lot for a team like Sunderland to come back. And there are quite a few probably parallels to cricket in that respect. Kenya is a good example. Kenya were World Cup semi-finalists in, I think it was 2003. There were a couple of sort of political issues that did help them get a bit of a leg up into a semi-final. Teams refused to travel to Zimbabwe to play in that tournament for political reasons there that we won't get into. But for Kenya, they reached the semi-final in 2003. And, when you look at even in emerging cricket circles, Kenya's not a one-day international country anymore. They're probably the 22nd, 23rd, 24th best team in the world right now. So it happens in cricket as well. Just like, as you said, football and the way the capitalist market kind of works there.
Oh, from a realistic point of view, Dan, since Blaze stole the one thing I wanted to ask you about the finals, I'm going to have to stick with a bit of a little question. But from a realistic point of view, and we've touched briefly each on the pandemic going at the moment, I'd love to see it. Do you personally see in October cricket being played and us being able to watch cricket in October?
I would say yes.
The optimist in me says yes as well. And I will say this, I think the biggest issue is going to be international travel, and that's something that cricket has a difficulty over other sports, currently experiencing all of this, is that, they've got to rely on international travel, and it will take, the geopolitical, powers, whoever they may be, to make sure that these countries are enabled to move around. Realistically, I can still see what that World Cup is still, I think the first game of the first round is 6 months at the end of this week, 6 months from now at the end of this week. And I would like to think that the curve has been flattened, at least in Australia it has. And I'm just hoping that, the other 16 teams in that tournament have the same, or kind of in the same boat. I do worry about a couple of the countries in the subcontinent who are a little bit later to jump on the lockdowns.
Yeah.
And given, it doesn't take a scientist to realize, look, there's 1 billion people in India. There's a very good chance that
that's the main concern, isn't it? It'd be India just because the population size,
has spread, and this is not just me making an assumption here. I'm talking to guys who live in the subcontinent, and they say, look, the numbers that we're getting on the news are only the number that have been tested and confirmed. We can't tell for sure,
exactly
how
right.
accurate that number is. And I'm sure in every other country it's the same situation too. It's just that, when you've got 1 billion people, it's very, very difficult to manage everything. And Australia's only got 24, 25 million people, and we're still going out to Manly and Bondi Beach, because we're idiots. And I'm sure people are way more disciplined than us in all this, and they're finding themselves in big trouble. And the USA, one of the global superpowers, have found it really troubling to get everyone into line. So it's not exclusive to people of different, backgrounds or people living in different areas. It's just a case of how things, were measured early on. And I think, New Zealand did a pretty good job early doors. I think we probably dropped the ball a little bit in some respects. But to bring it back to cricket, look, I think it could be the first international cricket that we do get when everything comes back.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that happens, because it's a global tournament. But then the next question you've got, and again looking at India, they've postponed the IPL, and they want to play the IPL in October, and it's like, well, hang on a second, that's when the World Cup is etched in the diary. And then it becomes a power struggle of the BCCI.
That's a really good question I want to ask you, actually. That's a really good question I want to ask you. What would India prioritise in regards to that? That's a really good question. Would they prioritise the IPL, or would they prioritise the T20 World Cup?
Yes.
Well, I think that what will happen is that they'll obviously want both, but I think the powers that be in Indian cricket will try to prioritise the IPL happening.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Postponing the World Cup to early
for
next
a later
year.
date.
Yeah, and rumours of that have already gone around in a few circles. I don't see how you could do that, because the other thing is if no one can travel into India to play, you've got no overseas players. The IPL, you can have, I think it's 5 overseas players playing in the 11, at least 4, I think 5. That makes up 40% of every team, and I don't think India are going to have a great IPL if it's completely Indian players. I think they'll still get the crowds. I think it'll still be popular, but I don't think every other country around the world who are looking to buy the rights to the IPL would necessarily want to watch that product. And
the thing is, as well, is that obviously if you were to delay the T20, you'd also have to be looking at the fact that if you're pushing it past into, say, potentially March or February, March, then you're running into the NRL and AFL then potentially colliding. So there is a lot of things that come into play with this. But I want to kind of jump off. I want to jump off this for now, and I want to go into some of these countries that you feel are improving and are on the smaller end of the scale, but pre-epidemic, they were looking really good in their growth. Who are the countries right now that are starting to really shine, that are making their way up?
Yeah, well, to kind of like bring that last answer into this question, Blaze, I think the thing that will impede on cricket is the fact that, there was actually meant to be a T20 World Cup next year as well, and the cycle was going to be recalibrated again. So a lot of these countries, who I'll bring up as part of the answer to the question that you're giving, a lot of these countries will hopefully get another opportunity, at least another bite of the cherry to qualify again.
Yeah.
To go back to the women's T20 World Cup at the start of the year, Thailand is a huge success story, and in the women's game, they're probably the best story, and probably the I hate the term fastest growing, but they are one of the quickest progressing teams in international cricket, at least on the women's front. We've actually got we actually had a guy who was working for us at Emerging Cricket that was actually the media manager for them at the Women's World Cup, and the stories that he told of some of their progress is amazing. So basically, 10 to 12 years ago, they had actually converted a lot of young junior sort of international level softballers into international cricket. And the thing about women's cricket that I've noticed in comparison to men's cricket is that women's international cricket seems to blood more talent from people who are actually born in that specific country. So a lot of the time you will get in men's international cricket is that players actually come from, say, an expat background who have settled in another country and they now qualify for said country. So you get guys who are coming from Australia and England or parts of the subcontinent into, say, well, we use Thailand as the example. They moved to Thailand and they qualify for Thailand under the residency rule. But
it's because that's their only chance of actually qualifying in reality. Because if they go and play for their actual, like their nation, say Australia or England or India, it's a lot more difficult to actually play. So I guess they would go to those minnow nations to have a much better opportunity.
Yeah, to a degree. A lot of guys. An example I'd use probably in a rebuttal for that is someone like Tim David of Singapore, who was actually born in Singapore and he plays for the Perth Scorchers in the Big Bash. And the other thing that happens in international cricket per the ICC eligibility laws is that you can actually play for an associate country, so a non-test playing country, for one country, and if you qualify to play for a test playing nation, you can actually basically jump into that country straight away. I'm not exactly sure what the rules are in regards to, say, rugby league for something like that, but the example that I'd use is someone, Hayden Walsh Jr. was actually a player who played for the USA, leg spin bowler from the USA, batted in the middle order, had a really good Caribbean Premier League. He actually, I think he was from the US Cayman Islands, so a little bit of a geographical kind of loophole there where I think he would actually technically qualify for the West Indies and America anyway. But he played for the USA and then he had a really good CPL, really good Caribbean Premier League, and he got plucked to play for the West Indies. So you can move from non-test playing nation to test playing nation if you're good enough. But yeah, you're right. Like there are issues of stuff like that, and for countries that blood their own talent, they're the ones on social media that do kind of, put this stab the likes of other countries who are trying to poach talent from other parts of the world, or they rely on so-called expat players. It's actually quite a big topic in international cricket, especially at this level, because as you said, because there isn't sometimes a lot of exposure and media exposure, a lot of these things can kind of go unnoticed. And you look at Nepal, and Nepal have basically, I don't think they've ever really had an expat player play for them because they've had enough talent to develop through their own ranks and through people who have been born and bred in Nepal. A lot of the Nepali fans have actually turned around and had a look at the way that the UAE and the USA have developed their cricketing talent, where people have gone there and lived for 3 years and qualified for those countries and then played for them. But then again, it comes back to another thing, like, well, the UAE, the way that the UAE runs as a country is that a lot of people move there for work, and it's just it's a bit of a hotbed for a lot of mega corporations and other companies who run out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And they just so happen to live for 3 years in UAE, and they're really good at cricket. A specific individual might be really good at cricket, and it's like, well, he probably feels like he is Emirati, from him being there and living there and being part of the UAE landscape. But there are people that turn around and say, oh, he's just a passport player, or he's just an export player, and it's something that cricket has a bit more of a problem in than other sports. And I think having a 3-year residency rule in comparison to something like football, where I think it's 5 years to gain nationality for another country, if you haven't represented another country at international senior level anyway, it becomes it's a tricky one for the ICC to deal with.
I wanted to have a chat. You've mentioned Nepal, and Nepal is one of my questions. I've also got some facts here. Your knowledge is so big, so I'm sure you know the name.
It's actually
Let's
incredible
touch
how
on
much knowledge you
Sandy.
have, mate. It really is special. Like, it's crazy how much you've spoken
Racetrack, please,
I'm
come on.
impressed.
about.
Mate, I've wasted a lot of time doing this. I don't know. I don't know. I could have spent my time. I could have spent my time learning Spanish or something, and done something a little bit more meaningful. In the eyes of some people, anyway. I love it, and I'm glad you guys like it as well. But I'm sure people have turned around and gone, this guy could have done anything, and he's here talking about,
What's your IQ,
UAE
Dan?
cricket.
What's your IQ?
I don't reckon it'd be any good. I reckon my spatial
Yeah, I
awareness.
reckon you might be a mentor, mate.
No.
Okay, no, we're moving off this. Hey, nasty question. We're getting on topic. Hey, nasty question. What were you going to ask?
My spatial awareness is horrific, and I have no common sense. So I don't think my IQ would be anything
Not many
special.
geniuses do. It's okay.
Ask you. You've mentioned that there's a lot of talent up and coming, and you've mentioned Nepal, which is a country that I think is outstanding. I want to touch on someone I've seen a bit of over the years. He's been in cricket for about 6 years now, and it is Sampal Kami. I've got some stats here to help me. Now, 40 runs of 30 balls in the debut when he played his first 2020 game, which was against Hong Kong. He continues to be named to represent Nepal in squads. He's very impressive, and he always helps in those Nepal Cup qualifying matches as well.
See, when you were targeting one specific Nepali player, it's always either Sandeep Lamichhane or Paris.
Sandeep Lamichhane. I love him.
Already really impressed.
I love Sandeep Lamichhane.
I've got decent stories about Sandeep actually playing in a tour of Nepal. But to get onto Sampal, he's actually a bit of a mold breaker in Nepali cricket because he wants to run in and bowl fast, and a lot of the Nepali talent coming through. It's no secret that the conditions in Nepal are conducive to spin bowling, and they produce a lot of really good spin bowlers. It doesn't take a genius, to work it out, no matter how smart you think I am, guys. But I do thank you. But talking about Sampal Kami, yeah, he's a good all-rounder. And Nepali actually have to bat all the way down because batting hasn't been a strong suit of Nepal's game. Basically, ever since I've started following associate cricket, they're very bowler heavy. If Paris Khadka doesn't make runs at the top of the order, they've often struggled, but they've had to rely on lower innings scores. And guys like Sampal Kami and Karan KC have come down in the lower order and put on really important runs for Nepal. And Sampal Kami is one of the few Nepali players outside of Sandeep Lamichhane who has played T20 franchise cricket. He got picked up in the Canadian Global T20 League as well. And yeah, he's a good talent. I think he just came off a back injury and lost a bit of time there. He lost his place in the team, but he'll get his spot back, and he's a key asset. So yeah, I love him. I think the Nepali team are full of a lot of X factor. They're quite an exciting, crop of players, and they've got a lot of young players coming through.
That's a really good transition point in regards to what I want to ask next. I want to ask, who are say, for example, for people who don't know about all these emerging cricket nations, who are the Virat Kohlis and the Stevie Smiths of these nations that we haven't heard about? We've just spoken about some from Nepal, but who are the big time players that are really showing their skills and showing their quality, but just not getting that exposure, like the Stevie Smiths or the Virat Kohlis?
Yeah, from an outside of Test cricket perspective, probably go back to Sandeep first. He's probably been on the T20 franchise circuit for about 2 years now. He's played in the Big Bash twice, the Caribbean Premier League twice, the IPL twice. He's played in Canada. He's played briefly for like a T20 World 11 in England as well. So he's gone around the circuit a few times. And as someone who's actually played against Sandeep, been lucky to play against Sandeep, he's very effective as a leg spin bowler because he's really quick through the air. He'll run off about 8 steps, and you can't pick his wrong'un. Which is such a key factor in leg spin bowling because he can beat both edges of the bat, which makes him crucial in limited overs cricket. And leg spin bowling at the moment is a bit of a cheat code because it's just so effective in T20 cricket. So he'd be right up there. And a role model that he'll probably look to is someone like Rashid Khan from Afghanistan. And Afghanistan, they're playing Test cricket now, but Rashid Khan is someone that that basically came through the same pathway.
Mujibu Rahman plays for Afghanistan as well, yeah?
Yeah, Mujibu Rahman. Yeah, Mujibu Rahman's played T20 cricket in the Big Bash. Qais Ahmed as well. I'm pretty sure Qais Ahmed hasn't even played international cricket for Afghanistan, but he's playing T20 format franchise cricket around the world, which shows you, how much talent they have. But to get back to the non-test playing teams and guys that hopefully we will see at the T20 World Cup coming up at the end of the year, Bilal Khan of Oman, outstanding quick bowler, good death bowler as well, can swing the white ball, which is sometimes uncommon. Guys like Mitchell Starc, there's only a handful of full-member international cricketers who can swing the white ball effectively. So for Bilal Khan to be able to do it for Oman is a key asset. He can almost bowl Yorkers almost at will. A couple other guys that I've got man crushes on. Herad Erasmus from Namibia is probably one of the best batsmen in associate cricket. He'll probably come in at number 3 or 4 for Namibia at the T20 World Cup. Just a glorious stroke player. Another player from Namibia off the top of my head is JJ Smith. He's like a hard-hitting all-rounder. Will open the bowling, bowls left arm seam, and hits the ball really hard. Actually got a really good technique for a bowling all-rounder. There's a lot of talent all the way through the Scottish team. I like Cole Kurtzer, who's an opening bat for them. Probably not as suited to the T20 format, but a good 50-over player. The Netherlands are stacked with talent. They've actually got quite a bit of fast bowling firepower, and they're in the Hobart group of the T20 World Cup, so they might actually get a lot of life out of the wicket at Belrive. The PNG opening pair, Asad Vala and Tony Ura, explosive. They'll go a long way to PNG's efforts at the World Cup, as will Norman Vanua, who's like a bowling all-rounder, will probably come in at 8, but he just absolutely whacks them. I haven't seen anyone hit the ball as cleanly as him. And then to look at Ireland, I know that they're a test nation as well, but they're coming into the first round of the T20 World Cup, and Kevin O'Brien and Paul Stirling are their opening pair. Kevin O'Brien's the only Irish player to score a Test 100, a one-day international 100, and a T20 international 100. So he's been doing it for Ireland for years. And again, they are officially a Test-playing nation, but between them and Afghanistan, who have just entered Test cricket, it's actually been more of a sort of blooding process where they've only really played, I think, 3 or 4 Test matches each. So, over the last 2 years, they only played 3 or 4 Test matches as new full members. They kind of get forgotten in the emerging world, but it's actually important that we keep, bringing them up because they are teams that are still moving into that new, bigger global space.
Dan, while we're on the topic of exposure, I want to go away from the players and go to the countries. Now, an interesting fact that I find, and you've spoken a lot about the International Cricket Council throughout the podcast, not for a while, but you've mentioned them a couple of times. And the interesting fact is that Ireland and Zimbabwe are part of those founding members of it. How come countries like Australia, England, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh are so well known for their cricket? Obviously, they've had a lot of talent renown. But countries like Zimbabwe, Ireland just seem to be completely forgotten about, but they are a big part in international cricket. And there's definitely financial investments made based on how much they do with the cricket.
I'd argue that South Africa should be included in that to an extent in regards to exposure.
Yeah, South Africa is a really strange one because you don't really hear of any domestic cricket going on in South Africa. They obviously have an outstanding first-class system because they develop so much talent, and internationally they have a reasonably good record. But it's something that cricket kind of lags behind in, is just that the media presence in a lot of these countries is just lacking. There's only a handful of cricket-specific journalists perhaps running in these countries. I know Ireland for a long time have really struggled. They've really struggled to get the media attention through their cricket. I know that historically in Irish culture, to even go back a little bit further, Ireland, because cricket was considered very much an English game. In Ireland, it meant that, for all of the frosty Irish-English tension over the decades of the 20th century, it's actually meant that cricket in Ireland actually lagged behind because, I've heard stories of even guys playing international cricket for Ireland in the mid to late 2000s who said, look, got on the bus to school or I caught the train to school and I had my cricket kit with me and I got, I basically got assaulted for playing cricket.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic and yeah, definitely something that would probably be worth expanding when I, look into it more. But yeah, you're right. There are several cases in the ICC where, because there aren't those voices to voice the successes of a lot of these cricketing countries, they seem to fall behind. And then what actually happens is there's kind of this contraflow and dominant flow in cricket media where, India is so, okay, there's a billion Indian people and all they want is Indian-centric content. And therefore, the likes of Cricinfo and Wisden and a lot of these places think, oh, I know what will get the most clicks is to make sure our coverage of India is strong. But what that means is that all these contraflows underneath really struggle to get the exposure. Something that I thought about when that Under-19 World Cup happened at the start of the year was, well, Japan actually qualified for that Under-19 Cricket World Cup, which is an amazing story in itself. But a lot of the talk and a lot of the discourse about Japanese cricket was really not well researched or really outdated or just completely false. And it was just because, well, a lot of these markets just have to talk about India for 5 minutes and that's all that the vast majority of their viewership wants.
And that goes back to what we were saying before as well. That goes back to exactly what we were saying before with the views.
So it doesn't matter if they get it wrong because no one's going to pull them up for being wrong. So, part of this emerging cricket movement that we have is to be like, well, hang on a second. We can be a media house that says we can call this out and, completely debunk the myths about Japanese cricket or Bangladeshi cricket or Irish cricket and to be a media house which exposes that. But yeah, it's a really good question, and even countries like South Africa who financially the game isn't in a great spot. And, going back to what we said at the very start of the conversation, when, teams aren't financially viable or they're not rich, history is only written by the winners in some ways, because they don't get that exposure, they don't have that money. There's no market for them to expose themselves. And there's no market for, the ESPNs, the Fox Sports, whatever, to talk about this stuff because it just doesn't get views or it doesn't get clicks. And we talked about that Zimbabwe Sri Lanka test series that happened at the same time when India were playing, and it just got absolutely no attention. And these are like the 9th and 10th best countries in the world in international cricket, and you get nothing. Like, imagine if, to bring it back to football again, imagine if Messi scores for Argentina. When Messi scores for Argentina, does the world hear about it? There's a very good chance they do, because the way that football runs is it's a very holistic, very worldly sport. There's over 200 FIFA members. Yeah. It's the global game in so many respects, and therefore it demands that respect. It doesn't matter if you're in Belarus or if you're in, I don't know, Kiwis in Vanuatu as an example.
Belarusian football.
The Belarusian First Division came up again today. I'm all about that FC Slutsk life, but it's a strange one, and you're right. Even countries, in from say 5th to 10th in the world, can't get that exposure because a lot of the content that is gobbled up by cricket fans is Indian centric.
Well, the FIFA rankings, if it's actually 9th Argentina and 10th Colombia, so if they played, like you said, if Messi scored against Colombia, you'd definitely hear about it. So, but in terms of Ireland, I feel like this might seem weird, but football is so prevalent there, and also UFC with Conor McGregor and stuff. There's just other things to talk about other than cricket. Like, Ireland is so heavily involved in those things now, and Zimbabwe with all the political turmoil. There ain't
too much going on. Too much going on in their society, in their situation to care about cricket as such. Is that what you're saying?
There's other things going on when Australia cricket is cricket. You know what I mean? Everyone's going to play cricket. There's always going to be stars coming through in an Australian and Indian and the English systems. Yeah.
The other thing about Zimbabwe too is that not only politically is the place still a mess after the whole Mugabe regime. I think we've mentioned the Mugabe regime twice now, but the other thing is too that Zimbabwe cricket is also has had issues of corruption in the past too, where it's meant that players who have played for the national team have actually struggled to be paid. They've retired and become what's called Kolpak players in the UK, where basically international cricketers, it happens a lot in South Africa and Zimbabwe, they actually renounce I think they might even renounce their citizenship and basically just say, look, I can play for a county as my profession, and I'm not eligible to play for my country anymore. A lot of South African players do it, and Blessing Muzarabani was a really good up-and-coming fast bowler for Zimbabwe, and he actually took a Colpack deal. I think it was with Northamptonshire. I can't remember for sure, but I think in the English county system, there's something like 45 South African players playing in county cricket, and every county is only supposed to have one overseas player playing for their county at any one time. So all these South African guys have essentially said, look, I wish to not be eligible to play for South Africa. I want to focus on a career, a stable income in county cricket. And guys like Kyle Abbott, who have burst onto the scene for South Africa, have then turned around and said, nah, it's not good enough. I'm financially not stable enough here in South Africa. I'm playing cricket.
What's the
in
pay
UK.
like for county cricket? Because would there be a lot of dual citizenship stuff going on?
Oh, quite possibly, yeah. I wouldn't be able to give you a figure. It's probably worth noting too that in the context of international sports people, cricketers really don't get paid anywhere close to, some of the mega stars in other sports. I think, you guys who are battling in the NRL getting paid, I don't know, say 100 to 150 grand a year. That's probably something a little bit more realistic.
That's the minimum, around 120, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the time there will be guys in the county system who get paid something like that, and it's only been the advent of franchise T20 international cricket which has really bridged the gap between your so-so professional earnings as a sports person to, oh, here you go, here's like a $1.5 million contract. Pat Cummins was set to receive $3.1 million in the IPL, and I think it equated to something like
6 weeks.
That was 8 weeks. 8 weeks of cricket for $3.1 million. So there's a massive discrepancy from the battlers in county cricket who are opening the batting for Somerset once a week to guys who are playing stars. 8 weeks in the IPL. Like I think it worked out to be something like $10,000 a ball that Pat Cummins would have bowled in the IPL to earn $3.1 million. Yeah, well, yeah, and the crazy part is all of that's up in the air at the moment with everything that's happening. But yeah, and then sorry, just to bring it back to, I know there was the example of Zimbabwe, but the other example of Ireland is that I think a lot of the sports that are played in Ireland are actually quite Irish. You have the likes of Gaelic football and hurling and the GAA works. They're quite. A lot of people don't realise, how different Ireland is to somewhere like, other parts. Well, sorry, not other parts of the UK. Northern Ireland's part of Great Britain, but the Republic of Ireland is very much alone. But yeah, it's crazy culturally. There's just so many different mouths to feed, and I think Australia comes almost from in the same respect. Is quite similar. We have two rugby. We've got rugby league. We have rugby union. We have AFL. Then we've got cricket in the summer. Cricket's been lucky in that it's been basically independent from everything else in the summer. Yes, we have the A-League every summer, but, from a grassroots level, all of that's played in the winter. Ireland has exactly the same problem, but the population is a lot. I think it's a lot smaller than ours. So
4 million, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the number I was probably going to roll with as well. But, they've got Gaelic football, they've got hurling. Their football league isn't really that strong. Any good player, any player of any ilk
to the EPL or Scottish Premier League
in England or Scotland. Yeah, so yeah, I think for cricket in Ireland, it's still very much a boutique sport, even though they've actually probably overachieved in it over the last 10.
Now, Bez, obviously, we've spoken an absolute ton about, all these players, all these teams, and all, the absolute undeniable talent that we're seeing, outside of these big time teams like Australia and India, and say even the West Indies, but the West Indies have gone backwards as well, I guess. England. The point of the matter is that, with what you do, you provide this exposure, and you've mentioned the lack of exposure, and you've mentioned the fact that they don't get the coverage that they that it deserves. What is your ultimate goals with immersion cricket?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when you talk about an end game in associate cricket, no one gets into emerging or associate cricket for dollars because there's basically not enough. People don't have two coins to rub together sometimes in associate cricket. I think for me, it's basically a case of well, here's a game that we as Australians grew up playing, had aspirations of playing at a decent level in international cricket. There's so many benefits of the game in so many respects. Why is it only been largely exclusive to nations that were unfortunate or lucky, depending on how you see it, exposed to for countries who, were unlucky to be on the wrong side of history? They actually had no real opportunity to get international cricket. And now in the 2000s, we've seen a bit of a renaissance of international teams playing cricket. We just want to see cricket being played at a decent level wherever people go. And for a lot of these people, just to get the opportunity to play a sport that we as Australians have actually been very lucky just to have it as a fabric of our national culture. So a lot of people have different goals with parts of emerging cricket. We talk to people who are trying to develop grassroots leagues in parts of Europe and making cricket, the bat and ball sport in the summertime as a comparison to football being in the winter. We speak to guys who, are running leagues in different parts of the world. But when it all comes down to it, we just all have this idea that cricket, like any other sport, should be played by everyone who wants to play it. There isn't any inhibitions about, what is perceived to be a cricketing country in different places, and we want people to have the opportunity to, if they're exposed to the sport, for them to say, look, I really enjoy this sport. I'm sure there's a club out there who plays the sport. And, talking to a lot of these guys from places like Uganda and parts of Africa who are exposed to cricket, and parts of South America who actually have a deep history of cricket in like the late 1800s, and now they're finding these history books and realizing, oh, hey, we actually had a bit of a history in this game. I think it's just good to be able to be a media house that curates all this content. And there are so many different fans of cricket in a lot of these pockets of the earth, a lot of these pockets of the globe. But if they're not united, then how do they know, people have the same passions as them? I was speaking to a guy by the name of Dan Weston who ran the European Cricket League last year. You guys probably would have seen on TV. It's where Pavel Florin exploded on the news, the Romanian bodybuilder who, sort of caught the internet alight for 5 minutes. But, what he's actually achieved, even before the European Cricket League, was Germany's society actually had this influx of asylum seekers coming from parts of the Middle East and other parts of the world. They've actually had a massive crop of cricket clubs, building and growing in pockets of Germany. And what he actually managed to do was he actually showed how many people actually played cricket in Germany. And all of a sudden, German cricket is one of the countries actually earmarked by the ICC as one of the biggest developmental countries in international cricket. So for us, it's just been a case of, look, if we can link together two people who love cricket in Argentina, and all of a sudden they've found out, oh, there's, 3 clubs in Buenos Aires that plays cricket, then, hey, we've won a mission there. We've done a job there. So it's just a case of as I said, the key word, exposing the talent, giving these guys a little bit more notoriety as someone who performs well at the international level, and basically inspiring either people willing to get into the game in their mid-20s or even the kids coming through and seeing, that there's a great chance to hopefully one day build a career in international sport, or to represent your country, or one day, hopefully, if things, go to plan, they play an Olympic sport if cricket was to ever be included in the Olympics. So it all comes down to, again, just that keyword, exposure. If we can find, 2 people who are interested in the game who don't have a community to voice their passion for the game, where that plays for them. So hopefully we can unite as many people as we can in as many countries as we can.
Boys, I'm gonna have to start wrapping us up. We've been going for about an hour now, and I'll tell you what, it's been absolutely fantastic conversation. I've learned so much tonight in all aspects of cricket, and it really has been something that I've seriously enjoyed for this last hour, because I have no idea about this kind of stuff. And although I obviously know Bez, and I see his posts and I see what he's doing, it's great to actually hear it, voice to voice and face to face to get an absolute feel for it, and especially the passion that he shows for it as well. I'm definitely going to be going out and checking emerging cricket a lot more, and I advise you guys to do so as well, because you can obviously see how passionate he is about this game, and you can obviously see how passionate he is about bringing the world of cricket that isn't as well known to your doorstep. So massive thank you to Daniel Beswick from Emerging Cricket Podcast for coming on, and definitely go and check out his website.
Yeah, cheers, guys. It probably should be worth noting too that there's three of us that run the operation predominantly, and we have dozens of contributors helping out from all around the world as well. So a shout out to all those guys that are helping driving the EC name.
Yeah, no, it's unreal what you do, mate. And like I said, this last hour has really brought it in.
Dan, would love it. It's been
Yeah,
very
it's been
interesting.
great, mate. Thank you very much.
Learn a lot tonight.
Oh, I learned a lot from Jesse Paraha in last week's show. So if I can have the same effect on a few of the other people, listening to the show and the movement is pushed along, then yeah, more than happy to jump on with you guys. It's been great.
Yeah, no, awesome, man. And so everyone, obviously, in the description below and on the screen as well, you'll see the social medias to go and check out Emerging Cricket, and I'll also leave the website link in the description below. Also, massive thanks to Shirls and Entertain House for coming along as per usual.
I just want to say right now, I want two things out of this podcast. I want Shirls to say another day, another podcast.
Well, he already
and
has.
Our guest or one of us to mention Belarusian football.
We already have. What do you mean? We've done both of those. Luke already said that at the beginning, and Bez mentioned Belarusian football before.
I want it on a weekly basis.
Look, anyway, guys, like I said, I'm going to have to wrap it up, so really appreciate you guys coming along. As always, if you haven't hit the like button yet, go and smack that thumbs up button. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, go and subscribe to all the channels, especially right here at BCast, where I know Entertain House and Shells as well. But while you're here, if you love your sport, this is the place to be. So go and hit that subscribe button and a little ding-a-ling-ling notification bell so you get a notification every single time we upload. Please stay healthy, please stay safe, and live your passion as per always, guys. That is the main thing. Stay safe, stay healthy, and live your passion. But that's going to do it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. See ya.